I wish I had someone to call Dad, Black girl said unknowingly to a Korean mafia boss on a public bus. Most people looked at Sunwoo and saw a storm wrapped in human skin. A man whose shadow did more damage than his fists, whose silence was a threat and whose presence cleared rooms like smoke from a fire alarm. The city knew his name the way children know the dark, with instinct and fear. But Kiki didn't see any of that. She saw a man sitting alone on a city bus, staring out the window like he was waiting for something that never came. She saw someone who looked the way she felt. Empty, untethered, lost. The bus smelled like rain and engine oil, that sharp metallic bite that clings to your throat and won't let go. Late afternoon light filtered through rain-streaked windows, turning everything gray and blurred. Wet coats dripped onto scuffed floors. Strangers sat shoulder to shoulder but worlds apart, faces buried in phones or newspapers or the middle distance. No one made eye contact. No one spoke. The city had trained them well. Kiki sat near the back, clutching a faded backpack against her ribs, and a crumpled social services form that felt like a death sentence written in bureaucratic language. Temporary foster placement. Ward of the state. No known relatives willing to assume custody. 6 weeks ago, her mother had been alive. 6 weeks ago, she'd had a home. Now she had a backpack, a form, and a system designed to swallow children whole. Across from her sat a man in a gray cashmere sweater, hands folded calmly on his knees. His hair was tied back in a neat knot. Neck tattoos disappeared into his collar like secrets he'd never tell. 2 men in black coats sat 3 rows behind him, pretending to scroll their phones but watching everything. Kiki had learned to notice these things. The watchers, the predators, the ones who moved through the world like they owned the air itself. Sunwoo was the head of the Hanul Syndicate, a Korean crime empire that moved money like chess pieces and people like dust. He laundered fortunes through legitimate businesses. He controlled territory from Chinatown to the waterfront. Politicians called him for favors they'd deny in daylight. And 3 hours ago, he had stood in the rain and watched them lower his younger brother into the ground. Gino. The name sat in his chest like a stone. His brother had been 26. Brilliant, reckless, the only person Sunwoo had ever let close enough to matter. And now he was gone. Not because of rival syndicates or federal investigations or the 1,000 dangers that came with their world. Gone because of a drunk driver on a Tuesday morning. Random, meaningless, final. Sunwoo felt nothing. He'd felt nothing during the service. Nothing while his mother wailed and his father stood rigid as iron. Nothing while associates offered condolences that tasted like performance. He'd buried grief so deep for so long that when real loss came, there was nowhere for it to land. Just a void where feeling should have been. The bus jolted over a pothole. Kiki's paper slipped from her lap and skidded across the aisle, stopping at Sunwoo's polished black shoe. He looked down, then bent slowly, picked it up, and held it out to her. Their eyes met. "Thank you, sir," Kiki said quietly. Her voice was steady. No fear, no performance, just courtesy wrapped in exhaustion. He nodded once and settled back into his seat. Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. The bus groaned through another intersection. Rain drummed against the roof. Someone coughed. A phone buzzed. The ordinary sounds of people moving through their lives. "My mom used to say buses were for people who didn't know where they were going," Kiki whispered, not sure why she was talking to a stranger. Maybe because he looked as lost as she felt. Sunwoo's expression shifted. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one. "Do you know where you're going?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, like gravel underfoot. She shook her head. "I just know where I don't want to go." His gaze dropped to the paper in her hand. Temporary foster placement. He understood immediately. The system, the shuffle, the erasure of identity behind file numbers and court dates. "I wish I had someone to call Dad," Kiki said suddenly, staring at the floor. The words came out before she could stop them. Raw, honest, desperate. Just someone who would stay. Sunwoo froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. His breath caught. The world narrowed to those 9 words hanging in the recycled air between them. A memory surfaced, unbidden, unwelcome. He was 7 years old, standing outside his father's office while men in expensive suits divided territory like cutting a map into pieces. His father hadn't looked at him once, hadn't said his name. Sun-woo had stood there for an hour, waiting to be seen, waiting to matter, waiting for his father to be a father instead of a king. He never had been, and Sun-woo had sworn he'd never need anyone the way he'd needed his father that day. He'd buried that child under concrete and blood, built an empire on top of the grave, become the kind of man people feared instead of the kind people left behind. Of all the things this stranger child could have said on a random Tuesday afternoon, she chose the one thing he had buried alive, the one wound that never healed, the one question he'd never answered. What does it mean to stay? 3 stops later, Kiki followed him off the bus. Not because he asked, not because he looked back, because she had nowhere else to go, and something in his silence felt more honest than all the social workers' promises combined. Outside, rain blurred the streetlights into halos of gold and white. Water pooled in broken asphalt, reflecting neon signs from a corner convenience store. The air smelled like wet concrete and exhaust. This wasn't the nice part of the city. This was the part where people minded their business and kept their heads down. Sun-woo's men noticed her immediately. The 2 from the bus materialized from the shadows, hands hovering near their coats. Tense, alert, reading the threat level of a 12-year-old girl in a soaked jacket. Sun-woo raised one hand slightly. They stopped but didn't relax. He turned to face her, rain darkening his gray sweater to charcoal. "You shouldn't follow strangers," he said. His tone wasn't paternal. It was practical. A warning. "You shouldn't look like someone who lost everything if you don't want people to notice." Kiki shot back. That made him pause. Really look at her. This child standing in the rain with a backpack and no umbrella. Chin lifted, eyes clear. Not begging, not afraid, just present. "What do you want, little one?" "A deal." One of his men shifted uncomfortably. Sun-woo raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Kiki took a breath. This was the moment. The edge of the cliff. Jump or walk away. "I need a legal guardian. Just for 1 year. Long enough to keep my mother's savings from disappearing into the system. You think I'm the right person for that?" There was no warmth in his voice, just curiosity. "No," she said honestly. "I think you're a powerful one." Silence. Rain drummed against car roofs. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Sun-woo studied her with the same intensity he used to read contracts and assess rivals. He saw intelligence, desperation, strategy. She wasn't just surviving. She was playing chess while drowning. The truth was, his lawyers had been begging him for months to soften his image. The federal investigation was tightening like a noose. Racketeering charges, money laundering allegations, white fraud. They were building a case brick by brick, and his defense team kept saying the same thing: you need to look human. You need something the jury can relate to. A child would do that. An orphan would do that better. It was cynical, calculated. Exactly the kind of move Sun-woo had built his empire on. "You'd live in my house," he said slowly, testing the words. "You'd follow my rules." "I already follow rules," Kiki replied. "I just don't belong to anyone. My world is dangerous. So is mine." She gestured at nothing and everything. The street, the system, the future waiting to swallow her. "At least yours has power." "Fair point. What did your mother leave you?" he asked. $63,000 in a savings account. A life insurance policy. Some jewelry. Kiki's voice stayed steady, but her hands tightened on her backpack straps. "It's not a fortune, but it's mine, and the state wants to manage it until I'm 18, which means it'll be gone by the time I'm 13. Sun-woo knew how that worked. Court-appointed administrators. Fees. Expenses. The slow bleed of assets into bureaucratic pockets. He'd seen it happen to properties, businesses, entire estates. "What makes you think I won't take it myself?" he asked. Kiki met his gaze without flinching. "Because you don't need it. And because I'll be more useful to you as someone who owes you a favor than as someone you stole from." Smart. Dangerously smart. One of his men, the one with the scar through his eyebrow, cleared his throat. "Boss, we should go." Sun-woo ignored him. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through Kiki's thin jacket. She was shivering but refused to show it. "I have conditions," Sun-woo said. "You go to school. You don't ask questions about my business. You don't repeat what you see or hear. Ever." "Agreed. You call me Sun-woo in private. In public, you call me whatever the lawyers tell you to call me. Fine. And if you put yourself in danger, if you make yourself a target, the deal is off. I will send you back to the system without hesitation." Kiki's jaw tightened. "I won't be a liability. You can't promise that. You're a child." "I'm a survivor," she corrected. "There's a difference." Sun-woo almost smiled. Almost. He recognized something in her. The same thing he'd seen in the mirror at her age. The refusal to be a victim. The willingness to trade pieces of yourself for survival. The cold mathematics of staying alive. After a long moment, he nodded once. "Come with me." Kiki exhaled. Relief and terror in equal measure. She'd just made a deal with a man the city called a monster. A man who controlled more darkness than light. A man who could protect her or destroy her with equal ease. But she was out of options. And sometimes survival meant walking into the fire and hoping you learned to breathe smoke. She followed him to a black sedan idling at the curb. Rain streaming down her face like tears, she refused to cry. The penthouse didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum built to worship absence. Kiki stood in the marble entryway, rain dripping from her jacket onto floors so polished she could see her reflection. Recessed lighting cast everything in cool whites and grays. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. A sea of lights stretching to the horizon, beautiful and unreachable. The furniture was expensive and untouched. The art on the walls looked like it cost more than her mother's entire life. And the silence. The silence was so complete it felt like pressure against her eardrums. Sun-woo set his keys in a glass bowl by the door. "Second floor. Third door on the left. That's yours. No welcome. No tour. Just coordinates." Kiki nodded and climbed the stairs, her wet sneakers squeaking against marble. Behind her, she heard Sun-woo speaking quietly in Korean to one of his men. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Clipped, efficient, already moving past the strangeness of bringing a child into his fortress. The room he'd given her was twice the size of the apartment she'd shared with her mother. A king bed with white linens. A desk, a closet that echoed when she opened it. Windows overlooking the city. Everything pristine. Everything cold. A room designed to exist in, not to be lived in. She set her backpack on the bed and sat beside it, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the bus, the rain, the deal. It drained out all at once, leaving her hollow. This was her life now. A stranger's house. A stranger's rules. A stranger who looked at her like a chess piece instead of a person. But she was safe. That had to count for something. The next morning, Sun-woo laid out the rules over breakfast. Neither of them ate. "You don't go into my office. Ever." He didn't look up from his phone. "You don't answer the door. You don't speak to anyone who comes here unless I tell you to. The third floor is off limits. Security cameras cover every common area. Don't do anything you wouldn't want recorded." Kiki stirred her untouched oatmeal. "What about school? Enrollment paperwork is being handled. You start Monday. What do I tell people? About you? That I'm your legal guardian. Nothing more. And if they ask how we met? Foster placement through family connections." He finally looked up. "The lawyers will prep you. Stick to the script." "Okay." He stood, already finished with the conversation. "I have meetings all day. Don't leave the building." Then he was gone. The door to his office closing with a quiet click that somehow sounded like a wall slamming down. Kiki spent the first 3 days wandering the penthouse like a ghost. She learned which rooms were empty and which were forbidden. She counted 17 security cameras. She noticed that Sun-woo's men rotated shifts every 8 hours. 2 inside, 2 in the lobby, 1 watching from a car across the street. She observed that Sunwoo never ate breakfast, drank his coffee black, and worked until 2 or 3 in the morning before sleeping exactly 4 hours. She watched him from doorways and hallways, studying the way he moved through his own home like a visitor. He never touched anything unnecessary, never lingered in rooms, never turned on lights if he could avoid it. It was like he was trying to leave no evidence he'd existed there at all. The penthouse had 8 bedrooms. 7 were empty, a kitchen that looked like it had never been cooked in, a living room where no one lived, a dining table set for 12 that had never seated more than 1. Empty rooms, empty heart. Kiki understood, in the way children understand things adults try to hide, that Sunwoo had built a kingdom and locked himself inside it alone. On the 4th day, he knocked on her door. Actual knocking, a courtesy she hadn't expected. "Come in," she said. He opened the door but didn't enter, maintaining the threshold like a border he wouldn't cross. "There's a charity gala Friday night. The lawyers think we should be seen together. In public." Kiki's stomach tightened. What kind of gala? The kind where powerful people pretend to care about causes while making deals in the courtroom. His tone was matter-of-fact. "You'll need appropriate clothing. Someone will take measurements this afternoon." "Will there be a lot of people?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, anxiety curling in her chest. She'd never been to anything like that. Didn't know how to move in that world. Didn't know the rules. Sunwoo seemed to read her hesitation. "Stay close to me. Don't speak unless spoken to. Smile when appropriate. That's all you need to do." "Okay." He turned to leave, then paused. "Kiki." She looked up. "You'll be fine," he said quietly, then corrected himself. "We'll be fine." It was the first time he'd included her in a we. The first acknowledgement that they were in this together, even if only as strategic partners. After he left, Kiki sat on the edge of her too-big bed in her too-empty room and wondered what it meant to pretend to be a daughter to a man who'd forgotten how to be human. Friday was coming, and with it, the first test of whether their lie could survive the light. The headlines hit before they even arrived. Hanul syndicate boss becomes guardian to orphaned girl. Crime lord's shocking act of compassion. Sunwoo's redemption? Gang leader takes in foster child. The media loved a monster with a heart. Sold papers, generated clicks, fit neatly into narratives about second chances and humanity hiding beneath hard exteriors. Sunwoo's lawyers were ecstatic. The prosecution was scrambling, and Kiki was about to walk into a room full of sharks wearing a borrowed yellow dress. The gala was held in a glass-walled ballroom overlooking the harbor. Chandeliers dripped crystal light across marble floors. Men in tuxedos and women in silk moved like choreographed dancers, champagne flutes catching the glow of 1,000 candles. Waiters glided between clusters of wealth and power, offering hors d'oeuvres that cost more than Kiki's weekly groceries used to. She felt like an imposter, like everyone could see through the expensive dress and professionally styled hair to the girl who'd been sleeping in a group home 6 days ago. Sunwoo walked beside her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a gesture that looked protective but felt like a leash. Cameras flashed, whispers rippled through the crowd. The infamous Sunwoo, architect of corruption, flanked by bodyguards and now a child. The optics were perfect. The judgment was immediate. "Smile," he murmured without moving his lips. "Just a little." Kiki forced her mouth into something approximating pleasant. Her cheeks already hurt. They made it halfway across the room before Donghyun stepped into their path. He was older than Sunwoo, with silver streaking his slicked-back hair and a smile that looked like it had been sharpened on a whetstone. He wore a navy suit that screamed old money and carried himself like a man who'd never been told no. "Sunwoo," Donghyun said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I see the rumors are true. The monster has adopted a child." His eyes slid to Kiki with theatrical pity. "How unexpected." Sunwoo's grip on Kiki's shoulder tightened fractionally. "A warning." "Donghyun, still compensating with volume, I see." Donghyun's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. He crouched slightly, bringing himself to Kiki's eye level. "Tell me, little one, Do you know who this man is? What he does when the cameras aren't watching? Kiki felt Sunwoo tense beside her, felt the bodyguards shift closer, felt every eye in their section of the ballroom turn toward them. She could stay quiet. That was the plan. Smile. Nod. Let Sunwoo handle it. But Dong Hyun's smirk, the way he looked at her like a prop, a weakness, something to exploit, ignited something sharp and reckless inside her chest. My dad says people who talk loud usually hide small plans, Kiki said sweetly, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. For 3 seconds, no one breathed. Then someone laughed. A genuine, surprised bark of amusement from somewhere in the crowd. Then another. The sound rippled outward like a stone thrown into still water. Dong Hyun's face flushed red. He straightened slowly, his smile now a rictus of barely contained rage. Charming, he said tightly. Let's hope she keeps that wit when she learns what kind of man raised her. I think, Sunwoo said quietly, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. We're done here. He guided Kiki away, his hand still on her shoulder, his expression unreadable. Behind them, Dong Hyun stared daggers into their backs while the crowd buzzed with delicious gossip. They didn't speak again until they were in the car, the gala's golden light fading in the rearview mirror. Don't ever do that again. Sunwoo's voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge beneath it Kiki hadn't heard before. She sat rigid in the leather seat, heart pounding. I'm sorry. You made an enemy tonight. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were unreadable in the passing streetlights. Dong Hyun doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. He was trying to humiliate you. He was testing you, and you failed the test by responding. Kiki's jaw tightened. So I was supposed to just stand there? Let him talk to you like that? Yes. Sunwoo's tone was absolute. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. Smile. Stay silent. Be invisible. That was the arrangement. Silence filled the car. Kiki stared at her hands, shame and anger warring in her chest. Then Sunwoo spoke again, softer this time. But you didn't. She looked up. He was almost smiling. Almost. You defended me, publicly, in front of people who matter. He shook his head slightly, as if surprised by his own words. That was unexpected. I thought that's what family does, Kiki said quietly. Sunwoo turned back to the window. We're not family. We're a strategic arrangement. Then why do you sound proud? He didn't answer, but his silence felt different than usual. Less like a wall, more like consideration. The car pulled into the building's underground garage. Sunwoo opened his door, then paused. The dress. Keep it. You'll need it again. For what? For when Dong Hyun retaliates. He met her eyes. He will. And when he does, you'll need to be ready. Kiki's stomach dropped. Did I make things worse? Sunwoo studied her for a long moment. No, he said finally. You proved you're not a weakness. His expression shifted, something almost like respect. You proved your armor. Then he was gone, striding toward the elevator, leaving Kiki sitting in the back seat with a yellow dress and the dawning realization that she'd just stepped into a war she didn't fully understand. But for the first time since her mother died, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, dangerous, necessary. The first shipment burned on a Tuesday. $3 million worth of imported electronics, torched in a warehouse near the docks. The fire department called it electrical malfunction. Sunwoo's men knew better. Someone had sent a message written in smoke and ash. The second hit came Friday. A cash courier intercepted en route to a legitimate holding company. $200,000 vanished like it had never existed. The courier was found unconscious in an alley, his memory conveniently blank about his attackers' faces. By the following Monday, 2 more safe houses had been compromised. Product seized, records copied. Sunwoo's infrastructure was bleeding from a dozen small cuts, each one precisely placed to cause maximum damage without triggering all-out war. Dong Hyun's signature was all over it. Subtle, deniable, effective. Kiki noticed the change in Sunwoo immediately. He stopped sleeping the minimal 4 hours, started snapping at his men, spent 18-hour stretches in his office making calls in rapid Korean, his voice like gravel grinding against steel. The few times she saw him in the hallway, he looked past her as if she were furniture. The distance she'd grown accustomed to became a chasm. "You're leaving." Sun-woo stood in the doorway of her room, backlit by the hallway. It was nearly midnight. She'd been reading on her bed, trying to focus on anything other than the tension crackling through the penthouse like electricity before a storm. "What?" Kiki sat up. "Boarding school. Upstate. The lawyers found one that specializes in children from complicated situations." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "You leave Sunday." "No. This isn't a negotiation. You're sending me away because of Dong-hyun." It wasn't a question. "I'm sending you away because you're a liability I can no longer afford." His voice was flat, clinical, the same tone he probably used when cutting business partners loose. This arrangement was always temporary. Consider it accelerated. Kiki stood, anger flaring hot in her chest. "You told me family doesn't run." "I never said we were family." Sun-woo's expression hardened. "I said you could stay in my house under specific conditions. Those conditions have changed. Because I defended you? Because I made Dong-hyun angry? Because you made yourself a target." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were cold, empty, the same vacant stare he'd had on the bus. "And I don't protect targets. I eliminate them or I remove them. Those are the only options." The words hit like a physical blow. Kiki felt something crack inside her chest. The fragile hope she'd been building that maybe, possibly, this could become real. "This is protection," Sun-woo continued. "You'll be safe there, educated, away from this. Protection without staying is just another goodbye," Kiki said, her voice shaking. "It's everyone else. It's my aunt. It's the system. I am not your family." The words came out sharp, final. "I'm a criminal who needed good publicity. You're a child who needed a signature. We both got what we needed. This is just the natural conclusion." Silence stretched between them like broken glass. Kiki wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something, but she'd learned young that emotion was a weakness people used against you. So she swallowed it down, buried it deep, and lifted her chin. "When do I pack?" Something flickered across Sun-woo's face. Regret, maybe, or relief. "Tomorrow. The car leaves at 8 Sunday morning." He turned to go. "You're a coward," Kiki said quietly. Sun-woo stopped, didn't turn around. "You're sending me away because you're scared," she continued. "Not of Dong-hyun, of caring about someone, of having something to lose again. You don't know anything about me. I know you buried your brother 3 weeks ago. I know you live in a penthouse with 8 empty bedrooms. I know you look at me sometimes like you're seeing someone else." Her voice cracked. "I know you're alone, and I know you're choosing to stay that way." For a long moment, Sun-woo stood frozen in the doorway. Then he walked away without another word. At 2:47 a.m., the lights went out. Not just in Kiki's room. The entire penthouse plunged into darkness so complete it felt solid. The hum of electronics died. The security camera's red recording lights blinked out. Even the ambient glow from the city seemed swallowed by something heavier than night. Kiki sat up in bed, heart hammering. She heard movement in the hallway. Footsteps. Quiet. Deliberate. Too many to be Sun-woo's men doing routine checks. Her door was locked. But locks only worked when people played by rules. She slipped out of bed, pressed herself against the wall beside the window, and waited in the darkness. Somewhere below, glass shattered. Then gunfire cracked the silence like thunder breaking open the sky. The war had come home. The gunfire wasn't like the movies. It was sharper, louder, each crack splitting the air like the world breaking apart one bullet at a time. Kiki pressed herself against the wall, barefoot on cold marble, trying to remember how to breathe. Her door was still locked, but that felt meaningless now. Locks were polite suggestions. Men with guns didn't ask permission. Another burst of automatic fire echoed from downstairs. Shouting in Korean. The heavy thud of someone hitting the floor. She needed to see, needed to know. The security room. Sunwoo had shown it to her once, briefly, when explaining the cameras. Third door past his office. If the backup generator kicked in, the monitors might still work. Kiki unlocked her door with shaking hands and slipped into the hallway. Emergency lighting flickered to life. Dim red strips along the baseboards casting everything in hellish shadow. Smoke hung in the air, acrid and chemical. She moved quickly, quietly, the way she'd learned navigating her mother's hospital at night when nurses weren't looking. Behind her, wood splintered. A door kicked open. Heavy boots on marble. She ran. The security room was unlocked, door hanging ajar. Inside, half the monitors were dead, but 6 screens still glowed with grainy infrared footage of the penthouse's interior. Kiki watched Sunwoo pressed behind an overturned table in the living room. Gun in hand, blood soaking through his left shoulder. 2 of his men were down. 3 attackers moved through the space with military precision, using furniture for cover, suppressing fire, keeping Sunwoo pinned. But something else caught her eye. Monitor 4, the hallway near the kitchen. Movement in the air vent. Shadows shifting behind the grate. They weren't just coming through the doors. They were in the ventilation system. Kiki's heart stopped. She grabbed the security radio from the desk. "They're in the vents." Her voice cracked. "Sunwoo, they're above you." Static. Then his voice, rough and breathless. "Kiki, where are you?" "Security room. I can see." "Lock the door. Stay down. Don't move." On the monitor, she watched him glance up just as a vent grate crashed down. A man dropped through, rifle raised. Sunwoo moved fast, putting 2 rounds center mass before the attacker could fire. But the distraction cost him. Another gunman rounded the corner. Muzzle flash. Sunwoo went down behind the table. Kiki's breath came in short gasps. Think. Then she remembered. Sunwoo's office. The blueprints he'd left out last week. The building's fire suppression system. Not water-based halon gas. Designed to displace oxygen in case of electrical fires. Including the ventilation system. The control panel was in the storage room. Sub-basement level. "There's a gas system," she said into the radio, her voice steadier than she felt. "In the storage room. If I trigger it, they can't breathe. The vents will fill." "No." Sunwoo's voice was absolute. "Too dangerous. You stay. I'm small. I can reach it." "Kiki, I'm ordering you." She dropped the radio and ran. The stairwell was dark. She took the steps 2 at a time, hands sliding along the railing, emergency lights barely cutting the shadows. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. Behind her, gunfire continued like a drumbeat counting down to someone's death. Sub-basement. The storage room door was reinforced steel, but unlocked. Inside, boxes stacked to the ceiling. Cleaning supplies, old furniture, and in the back corner, behind a shelf of industrial chemicals, the fire suppression control panel. Kiki squeezed through the narrow gap, scraping her shoulder against concrete. The panel was higher than she'd thought. She dragged over a crate, climbed on top, fingers finding the switches. Red, yellow, green. Labels in Korean and English. Halon discharge, ventilation system. Warning. Oxygen displacement. Evacuate before activation. Her hand hovered over the lever. People were going to suffocate. Maybe Sunwoo's men. Maybe the attackers. Maybe both. But Sunwoo was bleeding. And men were crawling through the vents like rats. And this was the only move she had left. Kiki pulled the lever. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the building groaned. Deep in its bones, something mechanical roared to life. She heard the hiss of gas flooding through pipes, through vents, through every crawl space and hidden passage. On the floor above, someone screamed. Kiki climbed back upstairs to chaos. White fog poured from every vent, thick and heavy, sinking to the floor like dry ice. Men stumbled out of the hallway, gasping, clawing at their throats. The attackers who'd been in the vents dropped through open grates, choking, disoriented. Sun Woo's men, wearing respirators now, moved through the fog like ghosts, disarming, restraining. The attack collapsed in minutes. Kiki found Sun Woo leaning against the wall near the kitchen, hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder, face pale but alive. "You didn't listen," he said when he saw her. "No," she agreed. "You could have died. So could you." He stared at her through the thinning fog. This child in pajamas who'd just flooded his building with halon gas to save his life, who'd ignored direct orders, who'd run toward danger instead of away from it. "Boarding school," he said quietly, "is no longer an option." "Good." Outside, sirens wailed closer. Red and blue lights painted the windows. Sun Woo reached out and pulled Kiki against his uninjured side. Not a hug, not quite, just proximity, acknowledgement. "You're insane," he muttered. "I learned from the best," she replied. And despite everything, the blood, the bodies, the fog still hanging in the air like ghosts, Sun Woo laughed. A real laugh, exhausted and pained and genuine. The war wasn't over. Donghyun was still out there. The police were 30 seconds away. Sun Woo was wounded and his organization was compromised. But in that moment, standing in the ruins of his fortress, Sun Woo realized something terrifying. He wasn't alone anymore, and he wasn't sure if that made him stronger or more vulnerable than he'd ever been in his life. The police lights turned everything into a strobing nightmare of blue and red. Paramedics moved through the penthouse like surgical teams through a war zone. Bodies were photographed. Evidence was tagged. Detectives asked questions. Sun Woo answered in monosyllables while a medic stitched his shoulder. Kiki sat on the stairs wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, watching the organized chaos swallow her temporary home. Glass crunched under boots. Camera flashes lit up the fog-damaged walls. A detective kept glancing at her with the expression adults used when they wanted to ask if she was okay but didn't actually want to hear the answer. Sun Woo finished with the paramedic and walked over. His arm was in a sling. His shirt was ruined. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 hours. He sat down beside her on the stairs, careful not to jostle his shoulder. "You're leaving," he said quietly. Kiki's chest tightened. "What?" "Tomorrow. Different city. Different name if necessary. My lawyers will arrange." "No." "This isn't a discussion." He stared straight ahead at the disaster his life had become. "I should have sent you away when I first said it. Before this. Before you." He stopped. Started again. "You almost died tonight." "So did you." "I'm used to it." "You're not. You shouldn't have to be." Kiki pulled the blanket tighter. "Where would I go?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere normal. Somewhere you can be a child instead of..." He gestured vaguely at the bullet holes in his walls, the blood on his floor, the evidence of violence that had nearly swallowed them both. "Instead of what?" "Your daughter." Sun Woo flinched like she'd struck him. "You're not my daughter. You're a child I agreed to protect under false pretenses. And I failed. Tonight proved that. Tonight proved I can protect you too. You shouldn't have to." His voice cracked, the first real emotion she'd heard from him in days. "You're 12 years old. You should be worried about homework and friends, not whether armed men are going to crawl through the vents. This life, my life, it's poison. And the longer you stay, the more it infects you." Kiki turned to face him fully. "You stood in front of that door. When they broke through, you put yourself between them and the stairs. Between them and me. That's what dads do," she interrupted. Her voice was steady, certain. "They stand in front of the danger, even when they're bleeding, even when they're scared." Sun Woo's jaw tightened. "I don't know how to be a father." "You think my mom knew how to be a mother when I was born?" Kiki shook her head. "She figured it out. She made mistakes. She got scared. But she stayed. That's all it is. Staying. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. You're just making it complicated because you're terrified." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw someone who understood him in ways he'd spent years making sure no one ever could. "Of what?" he asked quietly. "Of caring. of losing someone again, of being the person someone calls dad and having it actually mean something. Kiki reached into her pajama pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, slightly crumpled from being carried around. Sunwoo took it, unfolded it. It was a picture of him asleep at his desk. His head rested on his folded arms, papers scattered around him, coffee gone cold. The photo was taken from the doorway, Kiki's perspective. He looked exhausted, vulnerable, human. "When did you take this?" he asked. "Last week. You'd been working for 18 hours straight. I came to ask if you wanted dinner and you were just out." She paused. "You look less scary when you're tired, despite everything. The pain, the police, the ruins of his fortress." Sunwoo laughed. Started small, a breath that turned into a chuckle. Then something deeper, more genuine, shaking his shoulders and making him wince when his injury protested. He laughed until tears gathered in the corners of his eyes. This child sitting beside him holding proof that she'd been watching, caring, documenting the small human moments he thought he'd buried under layers of violence and control. "You're documenting evidence of my vulnerability," he said when he could speak again. "That's terrible operational security." "I'm documenting evidence that you're a person," Kiki corrected. "There's a difference." Sunwoo handed the photo back. "Keep it. Apparently you see things I don't." "So I'm staying?" He was quiet for a long time, watching police tape off sections of his living room, watching his empire's cracks become visible in fluorescent light and camera flashes. Finally, he spoke. "If you stay, things have to change." "Okay. I can't promise safety. My world doesn't work that way. But I can promise I'll stop trying to pretend you're not part of it. That's all I'm asking. And you call me whatever feels right, not what the lawyers say, not what sounds good in court." He met her eyes. "Whatever's true." Kiki nodded, something warm and fragile unfurling in her chest. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of something that looked like belonging. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "When did you decide?" "Decide what?" "To let me stay. Really stay." Sunwoo looked at the photo still clutched in her hand. Himself, vulnerable and sleeping, captured by someone who decided he was worth documenting. "When you pulled that lever," he said quietly, "when you risked everything to save someone who'd already told you to run, that's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That I'd already failed at keeping you at a distance. And that maybe," he paused, the words difficult and new, "maybe that wasn't actually failure." A detective called his name. More questions, more statements, the machinery of law and order grinding forward. But before Sunwoo stood, he placed his good hand briefly on Kiki's shoulder. Not a gesture for cameras, not strategy or performance, just acknowledgement, just connection. "Go to bed," he said. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Kiki nodded and watched him walk back into the chaos. This man who tried so hard to send her away and failed because somewhere between a bus ride and a gas lever, they'd become something neither of them had planned for. Something that looked dangerously close to family. Time moved differently after the night of smoke and steel. Not faster, not slower, just purposefully. Like the difference between drifting and sailing, both movement but one with direction. Kiki started school 3 weeks after the attack. Once the bullet holes were patched and the penthouse stopped smelling like halon gas and fear. A private academy where tuition cost more than most people's cars and students had security details waiting in black SUVs. She hated it for the first month. The other kids looked at her like a curiosity, the gangster's charity case. Teachers spoke to her slowly, carefully, as if trauma had made her fragile or stupid. But Kiki had learned survival long before she'd learned algebra. She kept her head down, did her work, and let them underestimate her. By October, she was top of her class. By December, even the whispers had mostly stopped. Sunwoo asked about school exactly once a week, usually over breakfast, a meal they'd started sharing after the attack, though neither acknowledged it as a change in routine. "How was your week?" he'd ask, not looking up from his coffee. "Fine," she'd answer. "Yours?" "Complicated." And that would be it. But he asked, every week, and she answered, every time. Small rituals, quiet patterns, the architecture of belonging built one unremarkable morning at a time. Sunwoo changed in ways Kiki noticed but never mentioned. He stopped taking meetings after 8 p.m., started coming home for dinner, even if he just sat at the table working on his laptop while Kiki ate. The third floor, previously forbidden, was suddenly just another hallway. He stopped flinching when she entered rooms unannounced. His men noticed too. Their boss made fewer reckless decisions, asked more questions, weighed consequences he used to ignore. When a territorial dispute arose in March, he negotiated instead of retaliating. His associates were baffled. His lawyers were relieved. Kiki understood. He had something to lose now, someone who'd notice if he didn't come home. The Hanul syndicate didn't become legitimate. Sunwoo wasn't naive or sentimental enough for that. But the violence became surgical rather than casual. The risks became calculated rather than accepted. He was still a criminal, still dangerous, still the man who ruled from shadows. He was just learning to do it like someone who planned to be alive next year. Donghyun's power eroded slowly, then all at once. After the failed attack, his allies started questioning his judgment. Burn shipments were one thing, surgical strikes that demonstrated strength. But sending armed men into a civilian residence where a child slept? That was sloppy, desperate, the kind of move that invited federal scrutiny none of them wanted. By spring, 2 of his key lieutenants had switched allegiances. By summer, his protection rackets had been absorbed by quieter, smarter operators. Donghyun still walked free, still carried his old money arrogance, but everyone could see the empire crumbling beneath his feet. Sunwoo watched it happen with the patience of someone who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge was simply surviving long enough to watch your enemies destroy themselves. "He'll come at us again," one of his men said during a strategy meeting. "Maybe," Sunwoo replied, "but he's already lost." Because the real victory wasn't destroying Donghyun. It was proving that Sunwoo could be threatened, attacked, pushed to the edge, and still choose not to send Kiki away. Still choose staying over safety. Still choose the harder path because it was the one that mattered. Kiki grew too. Not just taller, though she shot up 3 inches and had to replace her entire wardrobe twice. She grew harder where she needed to be and softer where she could afford it. She learned to read the tension in Sunwoo's shoulders. Learned when to ask questions and when to sit in silence. Learned the names of his associates, the structure of his business, the language of power spoken in nods and glances. She also learned it was okay to cry sometimes, to miss her mother, to be 12 instead of 20. Sunwoo found her once, late at night, looking at old photos of her mom on her phone. He didn't say anything, just sat on the edge of her bed until she stopped crying, then handed her his handkerchief, monogrammed, expensive, completely impractical, and waited until she was ready to talk or ready to sleep. She chose sleep. He stayed until her breathing evened out, then quietly left, closing the door with the careful silence of someone who'd learned that presence didn't always require words. One evening in late autumn, a year and 3 weeks after they'd met on a rain-soaked bus, official-looking documents arrived via courier. Sunwoo opened them at the kitchen table while Kiki did homework. He read in silence for several minutes, then set the papers down. "Court date is set," he said. "November 15th. Final guardianship hearing." Kiki looked up from her calculus. "What does that mean?" "It means a judge will decide if this arrangement becomes permanent. If I remain your legal guardian beyond the initial temporary order." He met her eyes. "If you want that, do you?" Sunwoo was quiet for a long moment. A year ago, he would have deflected, changed the subject, built walls. Now he just nodded. "Yes. Then I want it too. It won't be simple. They'll ask questions, investigate our lives. The prosecution might even use it against me. Claim I'm manipulating a child for sympathy. Let them claim whatever they want." Kiki closed her textbook. "We know what's true." "And what's that?" She smiled slightly. "That you're stuck with me, and I'm stuck with you, and neither of us is running anymore." Sunwoo almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he picked up the papers, initialed the required sections, and slid them across the table. Read these tonight. Make sure you understand what you're agreeing to. I already know what I'm agreeing to. Read them anyway. Fine. He stood, gathered his coffee, started toward his office, then paused in the doorway. Kiki, yeah, thank you for staying. She looked at him, this man who'd been a stranger, then a strategic alliance, then something neither of them had the courage to name until it was already true. Thank you for letting me, she replied, and Sunwoo smiled, a real smile, small and private and genuine. November 15th was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks until a judge would decide if a crime lord and an orphan could legally be what they'd already become in every way that mattered. 3 weeks until the lie they'd built became the truth they'd chosen. Time kept moving, purposefully, toward something that looked dangerously close to home. The courtroom was smaller than Kiki expected. Not the grand theatrical space from movies, but a practical room with fluorescent lights and worn wooden benches. It smelled like old paper and floor polish, the kind of place where lives were decided with rubber stamps and legal language. Sunwoo sat beside her at the petitioner's table, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the judge's monthly salary. His hands were folded on the table, perfectly still. But Kiki noticed the tension in his jaw, the way he kept glancing at her from the corner of his eye. He was nervous. Sunwoo, who negotiated with federal prosecutors and faced down armed rivals, was nervous about what a family court judge might decide. The judge was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses that sat low on her nose. She reviewed the file with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen every variation of broken family and knew better than to assume anything. This is an unusual case, Judge Martinez said finally, looking up. A temporary emergency placement that's requesting permanent status. Mr. Sunwoo, you have quite an extensive background. I'm aware, Your Honor. His voice was steady, respectful, nothing like the edge he used in business. The prosecution in your ongoing federal case has filed an objection, claiming this guardianship is a calculated move to appear sympathetic to potential jurors. They're welcome to their opinion. And you, Miss Kiki, the judge turned to her. You understand what permanent guardianship means? That you would remain under Mr. Sunwoo's care until you reach 18. Yes, Your Honor. You've been living with him for just over a year. That's not a long time. Tell me honestly, do you feel safe in his home? Kiki didn't hesitate. Yes. Do you feel he's provided adequately for your needs? Education, health, emotional support? Yes. Has he ever threatened you, harmed you, made you uncomfortable in any way? No. Never. Judge Martinez removed her glasses, studied Kiki with the sharp attention of someone trained to spot lies and coercion. Why do you want this arrangement to become permanent? The courtroom went quiet. Sunwoo's lawyer had prepped her for this question, given her talking points, safe, legal answers about stability and opportunity. Kiki ignored all of it. Because I didn't find a perfect man, she said, her voice clear in the silent room. I found someone who stayed. The judge raised an eyebrow. Elaborate. When my mom died, everyone had reasons why they couldn't help. My aunt had her own family. The system had too many kids already. Everyone I asked gave me logical explanations for why I was someone else's problem. Kiki glanced at Sunwoo. He could have done the same thing. Could have sent me away a dozen times. Should have sent me away when people attacked his home because of me. But he didn't, Judge Martinez observed. No. He stayed. Even when it was hard. Even when it was dangerous. Even when I was more trouble than I was worth. She paused. That's what family does. Not perfect people. Just people who choose to stay. The judge looked at Sunwoo. And you, Mr. Sunwoo? Why should I grant this petition? Why do you want permanent guardianship of this child? Sunwoo was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than Kiki had ever heard it in public. Because she made me stop living like I had nothing to lose, he said. For years, I moved through the world like I was already dead. Made decisions a living person wouldn't make. Took risks someone with a future would avoid. He looked at Kiki. She gave me something to lose, something worth protecting, something worth being better for. That's quite an admission, the judge said. It's the truth. Judge Martinez put her glasses back on, made a note in the file. The scratch of pen on paper felt impossibly loud. The court finds, she said finally, that while Mr. Sunwoo's background is concerning, the evidence suggests a stable, supportive environment. The child appears healthy, well-educated, and genuinely attached to her guardian. Therefore, I'm granting the petition for permanent guardianship. She struck her gavel once. Sharp, final, legal. This arrangement is now permanent until Miss Kiki reaches the age of majority or circumstances significantly change. Good luck to both of you. Outside, November sunlight hit the courthouse steps like a blessing. The city roared around them, traffic and construction and 1,000 human voices blending into urban symphony. Sunwoo's car waited at the curb, his men standing at respectful distance. Kiki stood on the steps, breathing in cold air that tasted like freedom and permanence and the strange intersection of both. So, she said, turning to Sunwoo, does this mean I can really call you Dad? He looked down at her. This child who'd appeared on a bus carrying grief and paperwork, who'd cracked his armor with 9 words, who'd saved his life and given him a reason to value it. For a year, he'd avoided the word, danced around it, used legal terminology and strategic language. Anything to avoid the vulnerability of that simple syllable. But standing in the sunlight, official documents filed, the lie finally becoming truth, he found he didn't want to avoid it anymore. Yes, he said softly, it does. Kiki smiled, bright and genuine and young in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in too long. She reached out and took his hand. Not for cameras, not for lawyers or judges or strategic optics, just because she could. Just because he was hers and she was his and the world could call it whatever it wanted. They called it guardianship, legal arrangement, strategic partnership. But walking down those courthouse steps into the noise and light of the city, they both knew what it actually was. Family, imperfect and dangerous and chosen. And for the first time in years, the man who'd looked like a storm wrapped in human skin walked into the sunlight holding the hand of a child who'd taught him that storms could become shelter, that losing everything could lead to finding what mattered. That staying, just staying, was the bravest thing either of them had ever done. The city kept moving around them, indifferent and eternal, but they had each other now. And in a world built on shifting alliances and temporary arrangements, that was the only permanence that mattered.